Okay, so I believe we're now live streaming. So we'll begin with the usual way we begin, and that is with, Allah's name, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and also our salam alaikum to our panelists today, as well as all those that are viewing us on Facebook Live, and all those who will be viewing us later on as we circulate the link. So my name is Afaf Nasher. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Executive Director for CARE New York. CARE, of course, stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations. We're a Muslim-based civil rights organization, national in scope, but CARE New York is your local chapter right here in this state, and we handle all New York matters. And as a part of this entire pandemic, of course, everybody is in social isolation and distancing. We really ramped up our ability to get information to our community digitally through these webinars, and we've hosted a number of different topics. And today's topic, in conjunction with the theme of trying to give voices to those that are marginalized and often not heard, is a topic that is really important for every community, including the Muslim community, and that is that of domestic violence. And we really want to bring this awareness to our community. And it's not just awareness about the problem, but also resources. And today we're really very much blessed to have two panelists along with me. And I'll allow them to introduce themselves, but it's Robina Niaz from Turning Point. And then we have an attorney, Rabia Amin, and I'll let each of you please introduce yourselves, your work, and then we'll get going with the topic at hand. So Sister Rabina, will you please grace us first?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for putting this together. I'm Robina Niaz, and I'm the founder and executive director of Turning Point for Women and Families. It's the first nonprofit in New York City to directly address domestic violence in the Muslim community. We have been doing this work for the last 15 years. And as you just said, Afaf, that this is a time when the marginalized and the isolated and the vulnerable are even more so. And so this is our effort to reach out and help them know that they still have resources and they're not alone. And then we are trying to do our best to still serve women who are, and families who are affected by domestic violence.
Inshallah.
And we're based in Queens. I'll share the number and resources later. But
yes, absolutely. We'll give you the opportunity to do so. And Sister Fariah, please.
Yes, hi, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Fariah Amin. I'm an attorney. I live and practice in New York City. I've been doing specifically domestic violence work, the intersection of domestic violence with divorce, custody, child support, immigration, as well as helping victims get orders of protection in court for, I want to say, several years now. I lost count, maybe 8 years, 9 years. I have my own law firm now, and I do help individuals seek protection once they're in those situations. So thank you once again so much for having me.
Well, thank you, really, both of you who are providing these invaluable services to community members who are facing these types of issues, which are not necessarily easy to speak about. It's not easy for an individual to speak about it. It's not easy for our community as a whole to think about and also implement changes that are necessary. And Sister Fariah, you mentioned a number of legal remedies, but before we get into the specifics of that, I'd really like to provide the general landscape for community members, sort of an understanding of what's going on at the base level. And we'll start really before the pandemic, and then we'll sort of turn to, any changes that you guys may have seen because of the pandemic in each of your respective work. So Sister Robina, if you don't mind, please, just tell us a little bit about, you said you've been doing this for a number of years, as you stated. What does this look like? What does this work look like? Who are the victims that you see every day? Why is this really a concern that everybody needs to know about?
so first of all, I'd like to say that domestic violence is not unique to the Muslim community. It cuts across borders, all kinds, economic, ethnic, religious, and it affects every community. And I've worked with people from almost all backgrounds in the last 2.5 decades. So it's, while the issue is not unique to us, the Muslim community, we are certainly very, very under-resourced in this area. The way domestic violence pans out is it is the need of the person who is the abuser or the perpetrator to use power and control to over the one that's the victim, right? Normally 95% of the victims are women. Children suffer. There's quite a bit of elder abuse in our communities as well, but we'll stick to domestic violence as it plays out in marriages. And so the need for the perpetrator to exercise power and control is at the basis of this. And
well,
so
let me interrupt you for a second, because we're using the terms power and control. And I know also from speaking to people who've been in situations that power and control comes in different forms. So when you say power and control over a person, what are you talking about? You know, for the sake of making it clear for those that are listening, you're talking about physical only or what?
No. So I want to clarify that abuse takes many, many forms. So just because a woman is not being battered physically doesn't mean that there's no abuse. So it can be physical, it can be financial, it can be verbal, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual, or it can be all of these things, and sexual abuse within marriages is also happening. So there are all these forms of abuse. And that's kind of a misunderstanding in the community and beyond, that unless somebody is being beaten physically, that she's not in danger, right? There's a lot of financial abuse going on as well. So anything that is a tool in the hands of the abuser to maintain control, he will do it.
Okay, and Sister Fariah, if you don't mind my asking, does the law reflect all these different types of abuses, and is there a component within the law that requires, you know, some sort of showing of this power and control over the individual? Just to connect what Sister Robina was talking about.
So there's been massive legislative changes to domestic violence and how it's perceived within the realm of the rest of the legal world, I would say, over the past few decades. It's become a central component in a lot of custody visitation cases. So with regards to whether the law recognizes that domestic violence does not have to be physical, yes, absolutely it does. In family court, the body of law that governs orders of protection and things of this sort was amended, and I don't remember how many years ago at this point. I believe it was over 5 years ago, to reflect even something such as financial abuse. A lot of people don't realize that if you're in a marriage or in a relationship and you have absolutely no control over the finances, you don't know where your abuser keeps their money, you don't work, you don't have access to money, you can't go to the bank, you are completely financially dependent on this person, which puts you in a situation where you can then not sever the relationship, because if you do so, you would have to choose between being homeless or having a home. So the law absolutely recognizes that domestic violence can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be mental, it can be financial. The law has gone even so far as to recognize that abuse that occurs towards an animal, a dog or a cat that you may love, can fall under domestic violence. So I had a client 5 years ago where her husband didn't really beat her, but he would beat her dog very badly in front of her to hurt her. So when I was able to procure an order of protection for her, I had the dog put on the order of protection, that if the husband was to do anything to the dog, it would be a violation of the order of protection. So I would say that the law really has evolved. That's not to say it doesn't have a long way to go. It does. But there's a lot of domestic violence advocates and organizations that are really pushing for the law to recognize all the nuances within DV.
Wow. So it's really good to hear that there is a reflection of the myriad of situations that people within domestic violence issues are facing, and it's not just physical, and it's reassuring. Sister Robina, you know, I always like to make things very real by giving examples of the human impact of this. Would you please give us a picture, and you can do it, you know, the way that you want, whether it's, and I know that there are always obviously confidentiality issues that you need to abide by, but whether it's a specific example from a while back that really rang, had an impact on you, just to give a human face, or if not necessarily a specific person, then perhaps clips or bits and pieces of the things that you've seen that are very real.
Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to add one more thing. A large segment of our community is immigrant, right? And the lack of immigration status is also used as a tool to control the woman. So many women remain undocumented even when their husbands are green card holders or citizens, because that allows him to control her even more. And to bring a human face to it, I'll give you an example of a phone call I got just 2 days ago, right? A friend called on behalf of somebody else who doesn't live in New York, is in another state. And she shared her story that this young woman was married off to somebody who was undocumented and he was very abusive. And she left him and remarried a gentleman who is an American citizen. And the woman claims that he is very nice to her, but he was beating up the son for not doing well in school or whatever, now especially because people are locked up in their homes and they're isolated. And the woman kept saying that, she has not been abused, it's actually the child. I said, but that's a crime as well, and that is domestic violence. And so I said, has she sought help in the past? And she said, no, she's undocumented. I said, listen, you please ask her to call this number. There are lawyers who provide pro bono services to help immigrant women who are undocumented, because they have a lot of rights as well. And I'm sure Fariah can speak to that. And then there are women there have been instances where women are working and they're earning their own money, but they have no right over their paychecks. The husband just takes it away and he controls it. And one of the factors that play in is also because we see a lot of joint families in our community. And so when there is domestic violence going on, often the mother-in-law will become another party and contribute to that abuse. So it's not just the husband who's abusing, it's his family who's controlling the woman and her children as well. And there are examples galore.
Sure.
And every day we see this play out. And since the shutdown, the number of calls that Turning Point is getting has increased quite a bit. And we'll talk about that later, but I just want everybody to know that when times like this hit, and the first time I became very aware of that was when 9/11 happened. And immediately after that, the backlash on Muslims trapped these women in their households, and their husbands were saying, well, you can't go out and ask for help because you're going to be in even more trouble. And then we saw it when Hurricane Sandy happened, when the financial crisis happened. So this is a global pandemic, and this is, everybody's fearful. But the women who are already living in fear and walking on eggshells in their own homes, which were places where they should be safe. So I'm just so worried about how they are managing through this time. And it's very, very important. People are saying that, oh, you can ask ICNA to deliver food to them. And I said, you don't understand.
Right. There's a totality of circumstances that needs to be addressed. There's the legal, there's the physical, there's the emotional, and feeding somebody food, a plate of food is not going to serve their needs in the way that it needs to be.
What if she is in more trouble because somebody's at her door and the abuser is living at home?
Yes,
right?
Yes. I can imagine something like that, because I would imagine many abusers don't want outside people to know that there's any kind of discord in the home to begin with. Fariah, Sister Robina brought in a very important point, And that is that while, mashallah, many of our Muslim populations are people who are citizens who've been here for many generations, there is a large portion of our community which are first generation immigrants. As such, they don't know what their rights are. And many of them, don't necessarily have the right immigration status that in their mind would not protect them or makes them more vulnerable, them and their children. So if you can please speak to that point and sort of, let's illuminate this topic a little bit and about those that specifically do not have citizenship status and who are dependent on that with their abuser.
Right. So it's a pretty complicated area.
Sure.
So I will start off by saying that, if and when a woman gets to the point where she feels that she has the support to leave an abusive relationship, the courts here don't look at a person's immigration status. In fact, I've seen petitions that have been successful where the only abuse alleged were threats of deportation. Repeated threats of deportation in and of itself could constitute what's called a family offense. So depending on the judge you're in front of, because judges have different readings of the law. But if you put someone in that situation where they feel that they cannot go to the police, even though they're being physically, mentally, emotionally abused or starved or whatever it is in their home, that could be sufficient in the eyes of the law. Now, with regards to immigration status, there are two ways that a woman who is battered or abused could obtain a green card by virtue of being battered and abused. The first one, and which is the most popular one, and I'm sure you are familiar with it, is obtaining status under VAWA petitions, which is Violence Against Women Act. That if you're married to somebody who is a US citizen, actually he can be a green card holder as well, and you can show that the marriage was done in good faith and you can prove that there was abuse within the marriage, you don't need that individual to sponsor you. You will be able to eventually get your green card and you will be able to adjust your status. The other way to do it, and this is a little bit more difficult, is through what's called a U visa. And a U visa is basically if you've been a victim of a crime and any kind of domestic violence, assault, menacing, threats, stalking, not all domestic violence, but most of it falls under what would also be a crime under the penal law, which is the code that governs criminal courts and criminal courtrooms. So if you're able to show that you were a victim of a crime, and the abuser in this situation doesn't necessarily have to be your husband or boyfriend or whoever, it could be even a random individual that you were walking down the street and somebody stabbed you, for example. I know it's an extreme example, but if that happened, you could also get a U visa. But let's limit the example specifically to domestic violence. So it could be against your husband, your boyfriend, whoever you were in an intimate relationship with. So long as you cooperate with the court process, they will give you what's called a certification. Once you receive the certification, you can apply for a green card through a U petition. You could get certified by assisting the district attorney, or you could get certified by filing a family offense petition and having the family court judge give you a certification. Those are more rare. However, getting status under a U petition is a little bit more difficult because not only does it require the woman to, I'm going to say women, although I will say that not all victims of violence are women, some are men, but because most are women, I'm going to use the term women, but it requires a woman to not just sever herself from this individual, but then to take the big step of having that person prosecuted. And a lot of women don't feel comfortable doing that. They fear if he's not successfully prosecuted or if he gets out on bail, I'm going to be in more danger because I then took the step of trying to put him in jail for what he did. So most women that I know prefer the VAWA if they're able to do it. Legally, there's different showings under both. One is easier than the other sometimes, depending on the specifics of the case. So those are the two ways you could end up getting status. But it is true, though, even though you have these options, even though somebody who doesn't have status knows that the courts can't discriminate against them, they know that there may be some legal mechanism for them to adjust their status or to get status, there's still a lot of what ifs along the way. It is not a guaranteed thing. So a lot of people don't want to get on the radar of of immigration or ICE or the government, especially because unfortunately, with the change of administration that we've had over the past 3 years, there have been ICE raids in family court. So we now have to be careful when we tell clients who don't have status to go to family court, because if their abuser wants and there's somebody who will take him seriously, ICE could come to court. And that's something we have to advise our clients about.
Yeah, and there's a lot of realities here, and I think it's really important, Fariah, for us to mention that while we are talking about potential legal roads that a person may endeavor to, to travel down, each situation is different. I mean, what we're talking about now is general. It's not meant to specifically legally advise any one particular person. So it's really important for people who find themselves in a situation to find a competent attorney so that they can help them to navigate specifically in accordance to their needs and what their situation is. And Robina, let me turn back to you if I may, please. So we're talking about the entire situation. And, I think what a lot of people fear, I would imagine, is that in any person who is in a domestic violence situation, there are a number of factors and concerns that they have. One of them may be that they may lose their immigration status, right? But then we talked a little bit about financial, and then we have children in the picture and whatnot. So taking that first step is an extremely brave moment, right? That I can't even imagine, to be honest with you. And, could you please talk to us about what it takes for, in your experience, what it takes for women to make that first step, and what can they expect in those first moments when they decide that they're going to do something about it?
You're so right that even when they know that they have some rights and they're undocumented or whatever, no matter how much anybody tells them, the fear is so deep rooted because and the length of marriage or relationship doesn't matter at all. One person is capable of destroying the other person's self-confidence and self-esteem to such a degree that she, again, like Fariah said, I'm going to call the victim a woman because majority of the people that are out there victimized by domestic violence are female. We're not saying that men are not abused, but 95% of the victims, as far as my knowledge goes, are female. So their self-confidence is shaken badly, and there's a lot of self-doubt. So they don't know whether they're doing the right thing, right? And we try and reassure them that Turning Point, for example, is a safe place and they can trust us. And that is why our address is confidential. We go and meet them at the subway stop. We don't give our address just in case they're being followed or something. But reassuring them that we will maintain confidentiality to the best of our ability. But fear plays a very, very important role. And just think of the Muslims in general after 9/11 have been living in fear, watching over their shoulders, worrying who's stalking them, who's and this woman is living with somebody who she's married to, who's probably the father of her children, and she's living in that kind of fear. She doesn't know what to expect. So when you live through that fear day in and day out, you don't know who to trust, right? I'm a survivor myself. And I started years ago doubting my own self. And I'm saying, oh my God, if I can't trust this person, who else can I trust? Right? And I'd been in this country just over a year. And it was immensely difficult. But despite having been educated, having worked, having traveled the whole world, so I kept thinking, my God, with all these advantages, if I was in this situation, what might women be doing? And so our job as a community, and then we are faced with a situation where majority of our community is in denial about the issue. We like to pretend it's not happening. Everything is hunky-dory. And what will people say about Muslims if we shine light on such a negative thing, right? So when the women who are victims or survivors are getting that message from the very community they belong to. That silences them even further. And we have to, when they come to us or they call, we recognize that it's taken them tremendous courage and strength, and maybe waiting sometimes for years to pick up the phone.
Absolutely.
To one of us, right? So the first thing we do is we assure them that everything they share with us is going to be confidential, and that our address is confidential, and we will encourage them to come and see one of our counselors. And sometimes they'll make an appointment and they won't show up.
Right.
And another crisis happens, and then they call again. And the minute the crisis kind of,
subsides for the moment,
subsides
right?
just for that moment, then and then they'll finally come. And when they meet one of us, they realize that we understand the cultural nuances. We understand how our faith is being used to perpetuate that abuse, right? A lot of things about Islam are being misinterpreted and presented and said, oh, but as a Muslim woman, you're not supposed to do this and I will do this to you, right? And they can't, trust has a huge, huge place in all of this. And sometimes it takes us years, right? It's like you said, it's an individual situation. For
Absolutely.
one person, it may be 6 months, another person, it may be 3 years. And so
Right.
slowly and gradually, through weekly counseling and support groups, we share with them what rights they have. We connect them with pro bono lawyers who can represent them. And this one thing that I want to underscore over here is that, if I can get that message out, that it's so important for them to come to a place like Turning Point, because we help the attorney build a case for her. We together work as a team and advocate on their behalf. And often the attorneys are non-Muslims and they don't understand a whole lot of cultural things that play out. That when we work with them, we are doing case management, we are providing them emotional support. Sometimes we are providing them financial support. We are helping them find resources. And we are working hand in hand with the attorney, if we are successful in connecting them with one, to help build her case so that she and her children are protected.
And I think that leads me right to Fariah, because here we are talking about those first moments and the amount of the gravity of those first moments, really, because it's not just coming forward and openly admitting to the abuse, but then it's also living with the impact and consequences of that admission on so many levels, right? On, intelligently and emotionally and then legally, and especially when you have others to worry about. So Fariah, I mean, from the legal perspective, when somebody comes in and they say, I'm ready to begin something, I'm ready to turn my life away from this person, legally speaking, I'll come right back to you, Sister Robina. What are those first moments for you? I mean, first of all, I can only imagine the conversation that you sometimes have to have with people, right? Hey, this is the reality of the situation. But what can they expect in those first moments, that first day?
So obviously, I try to manage expectations. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of people don't know that the court system or the way that, at least it's set up in New York, it can really re-traumatize a victim. And oftentimes by the time I have domestic violence victims come to me, they've made a lot of progress because they've already been in counseling. Already organizations like Saki and Turning Point and the various other domestic violence organizations that are out there have been working with this person, right? They've been providing this person with support. They've been making this person feel that there may be a way out for them, right? So but when they come to me, they're ready to go, but I do manage their expectations from the get-go, because oftentimes once they get to court, that's just the start of the battle. Most abusers especially if they've been in this country longer or perhaps born and raised here. They're very familiar with the systems. They might have money to perhaps hire a bigger law firm or a more aggressive attorney or whatever it is. They continue the power and control mechanism through the court systems, through litigation. So I have to really explain to them that this is the start and these are the things that could happen in your case. I don't do it all in the first day, but it is important for me to let them know that it may be an uphill battle for them, especially if children are involved. I would say 8 out of 10 cases where kids are involved, the abuser who's never changed a diaper in his life is going to now want full custody of the kids and will threaten the woman with, I will take your kids away. I will not give you a dime. Sometimes I see women after they've been sleeping on the street. They haven't gone home. They're too scared. And like Miss Robina said, that the domestic violence it's not just coming from the husband. You have father-in-laws involved, you have brother-in-laws, you have mother-in-laws. They won't feed the woman. They'll hit the children to hurt the woman. So by the time they come to me, they have made progress, but it really is an uphill battle. And I'm not saying this to discourage people. The law, there are a lot of laws that do protect women in this situation. And oftentimes, not oftentimes, most times, the evidence is there, like just because you've never called the police or you've never been to the hospital, the children have seen it, they've observed it. It's unfortunately, it has such an effect on children. Children get assigned attorneys. They tell their attorneys everything. This is what we've viewed in our parents' marriage and relationship. So I sometimes, or I say that domestic violence cases are my hardest cases. And they're the hardest cases, despite there being so much evidence. Usually my clients have videos, they have photos, they have audio, they have the children who completely support the mother because of everything they've seen. But the clients are the most difficult. It's because emotionally they've just been so traumatized, and I worry about how they're going to hold up on the stand, how they're going to hold up under cross-examination, whether the court is an adversarial process. Just because you say something happened to you doesn't mean it did. From day one, their credibility is questioned. The attorney for their husband or boyfriend or paramour is going to, from the first day, call this person's motives into question. From the first day is going to say, well, she's saying this because he didn't apply for her papers and, he didn't buy her this car that she wanted and it's all a lie. And if she was telling the truth, then why didn't she ever call the police? And there's no witnesses. And, and then all of a sudden I've had, so many clients who after the first or second court date are like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I don't care. I don't want money. I don't want child support. I don't want a divorce. I'm not coming back to court. So,
And Fariah, if you don't mind my saying, 2 questions that sort of come up, and then I'll go back to Sister Robina, because I know that we have you for a limited time. So I want to get a couple of questions in for you. 2 things that come up to mind in those first moments. I mean, I think one of the most well-known mechanisms to people is the restraining order, right? So can people get a restraining order even if they don't want to go further, with the legal challenge, number 1. And number 2, with regards to the situation that you just sort of gave us an example of somebody who's actually started through the process. In those situations, are they going back then? If they're saying, I don't want a divorce, they're going right back into this situation. And what does that do for their credibility next time around, if there is one?
I mean, as an attorney, I've always made the argument, I'll say, because judges are specifically trained in domestic violence. They are really starting to take it a lot more seriously. It's become it's a central factor when determining things such as custody and visitation, is whether there's been domestic violence in this relationship, who perpetrated it, and were the children present, and what, if any, harm came to the children. So, I've had clients who have been my clients for 6 or 7 years because every 2 years they file a petition and they go back, and I'm here for them when they're ready. You can't force someone to be ready before they're, in that place in their lives where they can make that decision. And yes, that argument is as old as time. And I've had opposing counsel throw it in my face so many times. And, the response to that is simple. The average woman leaves 7 times before she actually leaves. The fact that she went back doesn't mean that it didn't happen. The fact that she went back just means she didn't have the proper supports in place to be able to start her own life. That's all it means. It doesn't mean anything else. So
7 times.
I think
that's huge.
I think that's the statistic. It could be different. It could have changed by now. I think it's an old statistic. And with regards to just an order of protection in New York State, when a person goes to file The first day they're in court, they see a judge, and the judge will issue what's called an ex parte order of protection if they believe there's good cause. And what that basically means is they'll issue an order of protection without the other side having been there to explain their side. This is a temporary order and it runs court date to court date. So there are plenty of women who will come and file the case, and before they even get to trial, they have a temporary order in place. And for them, you know, they feel that just the act of filing, having the temporary order has less tension in the home. It does work for some people where all of a sudden the husband may realize, oh wait, she's spoken to a lawyer, I could get in trouble, especially if the husband is undocumented himself. Because if he's arrested on a violation of order of protection, he's facing potential deportation charges as well. So then it kind of, you know, will create a little bit more of an equal power you know, balance in the home. So there is that option for women who may not be ready to go the full 9 yards. They can just start off with the order, and then, you know, in a few months they feel maybe the other person has learned their lesson. And for many of these women, they just want their husbands to stop. You know, most of them are like, can you just get him to, you know, change his behavior? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't do that, but I can help you, you know, get orders and other legal remedies that'll make you feel safe and protected.
Thank you, Fariah. Robina, let me get back to you. I apologize. I know you wanted to say something, and once you've had the opportunity to say that, I also want you to touch upon the other resources that Turning Points helps women, because, you know, resources are really sort of key, that even when a person is emotionally ready and says, I'm going to make that step, but she's thinking, how am I going to pay my first month's rent? What am I doing with my children? What if he tries to take my kids, right? So these are really critical questions for her to decide whether or not she's going to take actions.
So before I go there, I wanted to underscore a couple of things. One, when the woman comes to us the first time, or even on the phone, we do something that's called safety planning, which includes telling them about their right to go and get an order of protection and all of that. But also we go through a whole long checklist of how safe they are at home, and do they know what to do or where to go should they need help. So are they keeping their documents safely? Do they have somebody they trust who has copies of their papers? And, you know, where are their valuables if they have any? All of those things. But I think one thing we need to remember, that women are often most in danger when they're trying to leave an abusive home, right? Women have been killed. When there was one woman who tried to leave her husband after 32 years of abuse, this is a couple of decades ago, was in a shelter, and her abuser found her at the subway stop and shot her dead. So women are hearing these stories, and they know that even if they succeed in running away, where do they go and how safe they are? The shelters are woefully under-resourced to serve Muslim women. There isn't enough shelter space in New York. It is a very, very difficult job to run a domestic violence shelter. And we have worked with women who have gone to shelters and then 3 or 4 days later run back to the abuser because the shelter staff was not trained culturally or otherwise. They said, we don't know, why does she have to wake up at 5 in the morning? And, you know, and then even if you say they can't eat pork or whatever, they'll give them the same pans in which ham and pork is cooked to cook a vegetarian meal. And there are stories galore. So we must understand that women, you know, have very little recourse.
Right, Robina, I apologize. I'm going to come right back to you and you'll get my individual attention. I know Robina has to leave in just a few minutes, which I just want to give her the last opportunity to maybe say what she needs to get out now. And if you can include Fariah, you know, obviously you're a Muslim attorney, mashallah. Gotta say, I'm really proud of the work that you're doing. May Allah, you know, help you and assist you and make you just a source of khair and impact for our community and for all communities, all of humanity. There's something you'd like to add now, including maybe how your own cultural and religious identity helps you in this work. You're welcome to have the next minute or two before I then give Sister Robina my undivided attention.
Oh, thank you so much. No, absolutely. I think being a female Muslim attorney who understands both American culture as well as Muslim or Islamic culture. I'm South Asian. I grew up in a South Asian household, so I'm very familiar with a lot of issues in our community. It definitely helps. And I do assigned panel court work as well. And what that means is that I'm an independent contractor with New York City and New York State. So I do get cases and I do through the court system, and I represent indigent individuals. And a lot of the judges will seek me out. You know, when they see that it's a Muslim family, whether it's an child abuse case or whether it's a domestic violence case, they do seek me out. And it's because of cultural competency. Right. And there are a lot of things that I, am able to explain better than my client would had they had an attorney who wasn't familiar. I do want to say before I go, and I think it's important for everyone to hear, obviously with quarantine, domestic violence rates are really high, the numbers are going up, as well as child abuse cases as well. And there's many reasons for this, other than the fact that women are stuck at home with their abusers. There's unemployment, right. People are frustrated, people are taking, their anger out on their family, on their children, people are doing drugs, drinking, alcohol, a lot of that, all of it is going up. Family courts are physically closed right now. However, if you need an order of protection, there has an email address that has been created for litigants to email the court and say, I'm in danger. Here is my information. I need an order of protection. And there is a mechanism in place for that person to get an order of protection. I don't know if you want me to send you that information in an email. Absolutely. So you can circulate it. But so I don't want you to think that because everything is closed right now, you cannot seek protection. You can. You reach out to the courts, they will assign you an attorney. They will try to have the person that you wish excluded from your home served. And, there is recourse and remedy even during these difficult times.
Excellent. Thank you, Fariah. And definitely, please do pass that along. We will make sure that we make those resources available. And I thank you so much for your time. I know you came on sort of last minute in place of someone who wasn't feeling well. Again, may you be rewarded for everything you do. And we look forward to continued contact with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good afternoon. Fariah. All right. Bye-bye. Assalamu
alaikum. Okay, Sister Robina, so we're still going to be live with you, and I apologize for interrupting you before. I know you were saying some really important things that I want to make sure that everybody hears. I wanted to catch, Sister Fariah before she had to leave. She had told us in advance. So if you can please continue with your train of thought. I know we're talking about just, the resources that people have, and that moment in which even when they do decide to leave, they're exposed to increased danger at times.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad that Fariah brought that up, that, with the shutdown and everything, it's not like there's no legal recourse, that women have a way to get an order of protection if they're in danger. And I urge them to use it if they feel they are in danger of being harmed, or their children are being harmed. It's better to get help than, suffer the consequences, especially at this time, because one of the things that abusers do is, that's a tool that they use to control, is to isolate their victims from outside help. Right?
Which I think is probably even more convenient now with social distancing and isolation in place, and with all the other stress factors that, Fariah had mentioned, it just makes the situation worse during this pandemic.
So that said, some of the things that I wanted to highlight, and my staff who's working with clients, even at this time, we're all working from home, and we are providing counseling and support groups and all of that, that this pandemic and this shutdown has triggered and re-triggered the trauma that victims of domestic violence have been living with, right? It's re-traumatizing them. It's made them more fearful, and the uncertainty is not helping. At least in 5 cases in the last week, because we reached out to each one of them individually to find out what was it that their immediate need was. Do they have food on the table? Do they have, is their rent paid? Whatever. They are women who have left abusive homes, and we've been working with them for 2 years. And finally, now they got to the point where they'd found a job or they were about to start a job. We
And they're
helped
unemployed
them through
again.
some of their trainings, and now they are feeling all over again like whatever little control they accomplished and achieved over the last couple of years or 6 months, it's all gone down the drain. And what's next? So what our difficult task is to virtually keep reassuring them that they're not alone, that we are here and we are doing everything in our power to be there for them, right? We are providing them financial assistance. We are sending them money, right? We're saying, if you need help, stay in touch with us. It's really good that some of them have laptops or phones that they can sign into a Zoom meeting. So every Monday, we are running a support group for them. We're providing them one-on-one counseling.
And are
Right?
you really able to reach people through these methods if their partner or if their abuser, it tends to be more at home? See, that's what's coming to my mind, right? So they've got to be lucky enough to have that private space to be able to engage in this.
Well, that's why I'm saying that not everybody is able to engage, but the women who are living with abusers, even when we were physically open, the hardest part of our work was to get them to come and see us, right? So now it's even harder. At least when schools were open, some of the women would drop their children to school and then, on whatever pretext, come and attend the support group or come and attend a session of counseling, right? Or if the abuser was at his work and they couldn't come out, we would give them a phone counseling session. Now, with everybody at home, it's become that much harder, right? But we are trying very, very hard to deal with this is the new normal now, and we don't know how long it's going to last. And so I want to give out the number for Turning Point, which we have created just so people can reach us. It's 718-550-3586. Between the hours of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., they'll always have somebody answering the phone and doing an intake.
Please repeat that number, and then of course you can email it to us and we'll make sure that we provide it as well in our written resources.
Yes. So it's 718-550-3586. Okay. And like Fariah said, that if they are in danger, they must call 911 even now.
I was about to say that, so I'm glad you said it first.
That just because we are getting, conflicting news on the TV about not to go to the hospital, not to call 911, this is one situation when they and their children are in danger that they must call 911 and ask for help. I have shared a bunch of resources with Fred before we started, and he said he was going to put all that out, but there are other organizations, the domestic violence shelters, not the most ideal situation, especially at this time. But the most important thing for women and children who are at home and those who are suffering, if they can, to please contact us so we can help them through that isolation. They will be safe with us, and we promise confidentiality.
And Sister Robina, you don't force them to do anything that they're not ready to do. It's simply a conversation in the beginning. I just want to make sure that they understand that in calling you, they're not tying themselves to anything in particular, but rather about learning what their resources
and what their options are, and that they're not alone. And yet, when they come to us or when we do safety planning, we remind them that if you have children and there's abuse going on at home, you must report it. You must report it, because what happens then, the system accuses the mother of exposing the children to domestic violence. And because they're minors, their rights, there's Child Protective Agency administration of children's services. And so our job is to help them deal with that fear that is often, again, used as a tool to control, is if you get help, your children will be taken away. And that is wrong, right?
I think that's deserving of a separate, discussion in and of itself, inshallah, one day. And we hope to have that opportunity and talk about, the kinds of issues that are impacting our youth, and in particular, things of this sort, which again, are just so hard to grapple with because, the innocence of a child that is robbed because of domestic violence in the home, or the terrible situation of domestic violence that anybody undergoes with or without children, is immense. And, as I'm reminded myself as a Muslim that, it is our job and our duty to be there for one another in these instances. And we cannot turn a blind eye to it because Allah sees it. And if we know that it exists and we ignore it, we will be asked about why we ignore it, right? So it's really important, that we get this information out and that we try to assist in every way that we can. Sister Robina, if you may, please, I appreciate your time immensely. I appreciate the team at Turning Point immensely because I know it's not easy work. It has an emotional toll, as well as a toll in every other way, I would imagine. And you've been in this for a while, maybe, and just someone, as you mentioned, bravely mentioned, that you yourself coming from a point of experience yourself, if you can just perhaps maybe share with us how your cultural or religious identity helped you to come into this type of work, and what gives you that strength to go on listening to these kinds of instances day in and day out.
Well, as you said, that, our faith is our anchor, right? And so when I was coming out of my own situation, I asked myself that there must have been a reason why this was part of my journey, right? And my mother said, you have a home in Pakistan, come back. And I said, Ma, I need to figure out why I experienced what I experienced. And that was 28 years ago, right? And one of the thoughts that crossed my mind, that if I had all the advantages that a woman could have, including tremendous support from my family and friends, my family was thousands of miles away, that this is how isolated I am, this is how I am feeling, what must be happening to women who don't have what I have? And in that one moment, I decided that I would spend the rest of my life trying to help women who may be faced with similar situations. And what really kind of meant a lot to me was our own Muslim teaching and perspective that we must want for others what we want for ourselves. And if we see injustice anywhere, we must speak up, we must do something about it. And the perpetrator, whether he's a family member or my own son, if I had one, or whatever, it is my duty to stand up with the oppressed and fight against injustice. And I think this is one of the most serious injustices that we see in our own families. What have we been taught as Muslims? Our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself said that the best of you are those who are best to your wives, right? Do we see that playing out? And one tragedy that I can't take out of my head was, I don't know if you remember, in January of 2019, a Muslim woman, Pakistani Muslim woman in Fresh Meadows, was murdered by her own husband.
I do remember.
Her teenage daughter was stabbed. And I went to the Islamic Center and I talked with people. And I said, this didn't happen out of the blue. Did anybody know that the sister was suffering? And educated women said, we did, Sister Robina, but she was undocumented. I said, how many times have we come to the center and shared our information and given brochures and given talks. I wish one of you had just given her our number and asked her to call, right? We have a youth program for teenage Muslim girls. And the principle of that is that we can't just be doing the work after the fact. How do we teach young girls what their rights are and how to make the right choices and how to recognize abuse and then get, try and not get into a situation like that or get themselves out. And several of those young girls have recognized domestic violence and brought their mothers to us for counseling.
Yes, I've heard of situations like that as well, in which the youth unfortunately have to lend their strength and support to the parent who doesn't necessarily know otherwise. And I think this part of education, I mean, I want to thank you. Our time's limited, but certainly the conversation can go on and on. But there's two things that you mentioned there, and that's the education of our women and girls. And I think also we want to include the youth boys as well, because they have to know that this is not okay as well. And young boys are impacted by this as they watch the cycle of violence in their home. So we certainly need to expand that circle of education and that mission. What drives you, the idea that as Muslims, we're not permitted to stand by as injustice takes place. That's certainly something that we too are committed to as an organization, and why I and all my team members do what we do. And everyone has a role to play in making sure that we execute and implement this very basic principle of our faith. So Sister Robina, thank you so much. I want to end with you giving that phone number one more time. And I promise you and our listeners that we will be circulating those resources you gave.
And before I go, if I may, I want to thank each and every person on our team who is working so hard right now to be available to do the work. I'm not doing this alone. I couldn't do it without our team. We don't have time to name each and every one of them, but please find us on our Facebook. It's Turning Point for Women and Families, and you will find an update every day with what's going on, how to get help, where to go, who to call, and they will respond. The number again is 718-550-3586. If someone is not in a position to call, they can reach us by email as well. It's info@tpny.org. There are a whole lot of resources out there that will be on CARE's this at the end of this. I think you're going
to CARE New York will post all this.
I'm going to spend time talking about that. I want to thank you, CARE and Afaf, your leadership. I think we are in this together. And
absolutely,
whether it's civil rights or it's women's rights, or if our homes are not safe, I keep saying, and I keep drawing attention to this, that if our homes are not free of violence, our societies will never be free of violence. It starts right there. And we have to keep working together and try and put an end to it. So thank you. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you and the entire CARE team, and we'll be in touch. And if you know of somebody who needs our help, send them our way, please.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Sister Robina, again, for all the dedicated service that you and your team provide. And, Sister Fariah has left, but we thank her as well. We'll post those resources as promised. And we thank all those that watched, and we remind everybody that, these resources, they'll be available on our website, on our social media. Please find us if you need to contact us, if you need us to facilitate a meeting with Turning Points or with another organization, please contact us. We also try to maintain resources for things that are outside of our parameters. So again, Sister Robina, this information has been invaluable, and we look forward to continuing the information and the work to ending this violence. Jazakumullah khair to you and to our viewers. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.